By April 2026, the maritime conflict with the Islamic Republic of Iran had choked off the Strait of Hormuz, driving global Brent crude oil prices to $109 a barrel. The United States launched Operation Epic Theory to force the waterway back open. Doing so required absolute air dominance, which meant neutralizing the Iranian Integrated Air Defense Systems, or IADS, stationed deep within the country. Pushing deep into hostile airspace carried a specific catastrophic risk. A downed aircraft meant American personnel trapped on the ground. If the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps captured a prisoner of war, Tehran would instantly gain the leverage needed to dictate the terms of a ceasefire. The United States military had to systematically dismantle a heavily defended nation, while ensuring that not a single service member fell into enemy hands. On Friday, April 3rd, that exact nightmare scenario materialized. A McDonnell Douglas F-15E Strike Eagle, a $100 million dual-role fighter built for heavy payload delivery, was running an infrastructure interdiction mission. The aircraft belonged to the 494th Fighter Squadron out of RAF Lakenheath. They were operating well past the initial suppression phase of the war, exposing a non-stealthy airframe to lingering ground threats. The Air Defense Network caught them. The IRGC landed what U.S. analysts later called a lucky shot. A mobile surface-to-air missile slipped past the aircraft's electronic warfare suite and detonated. With internal systems catastrophically compromised, the two-person crew initiated an emergency ejection at 7,000 feet, descending right over the freezing, treacherous peaks of the Kogilyuya and Boyar Ahmad province. As their parachutes deployed, the intense winds over the Zagros Mountains drove the pilot and the weapons systems officer miles apart. That physical separation instantly fractured the recovery effort into two entirely different missions. The Joint Personnel Recovery Center located the pilot's transponder almost immediately. They launched a daylight extraction package, prioritizing rapid response speed over stealth. The Iranians met the rescue force with intense hostility. The extraction helicopters successfully pulled the pilot from the terrain, but an HH-60 transport took multiple hits from small arms fire, injuring members of the rescue crew. The close air support package took an even heavier hit. An A-10 Warthog escorting the helicopters sustained severe battle damage, forcing its pilot to limp the crippled jet out of Iranian airspace before ejecting over Kuwait. The military secured the pilot, but the sheer violence of that Friday morning operation proved the daytime airspace was lethal, and a high-ranking colonel, the weapons systems officer, was still missing in the mountains. For the next 48 hours, the seriously wounded colonel had to rely entirely on his survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training. He took cover in the deep, rocky crevices of the Zagros Range. The Iranian government immediately broadcast a bounty for the enemy airmen. Local Bakhtiari tribal fighters mobilized across the highlands, acting as an armed search grid moving steadily closer to his hide site. To establish a lifeline to Washington, the colonel took a calculated risk. He left the safety of the crevices, moving only at night, and climbed up to the highly exposed 7,000-foot ridgelines to get a clear line of sight to space. He had a handgun and basic rations, but his physical survival depended entirely on navigating that hostile geography to clear a path for a single piece of communication technology. This animated schematic demonstrates how that technology works. The airman was carrying a Boeing Combat Survivor Evader Locator, or CSEL. It operates entirely differently from a standard emergency radio. Standard distress beacons emit a continuous radio frequency wave. In a heavily contested environment, enemy air defenses detect that broad radiation and triangulate the source within minutes. The CSEL device utilizes a low probability of intercept data transmission. Instead of a constant wave, it fires ultra-short, encrypted digital bursts directly to military satellites, bypassing local Iranian radar sweeps entirely. But receiving a signal doesn't guarantee a rescue. Since the Vietnam War, enemy forces have routinely captured distress beacons and used them as bait to lure rescue helicopters into anti-aircraft ambushes. To ensure they weren't flying into a trap, the CIA and NSA monitored the beacon's movement patterns. They verified that the signals were originating from locations that aligned perfectly with U.S. evasion doctrine. Concurrently, Israeli electronic surveillance units embedded in the theater intercepted local communications, providing a secondary layer of verification that the distress signal was genuine. The C-cell system provided undeniable proof of life and an exact coordinate. With the risk of an ambush mitigated, the Pentagon had the hard intelligence required to authorize a massive kinetic extraction. This tactical map outlines the second critical layer of the operation. While the colonel hid in the mountains, the CIA launched an aggressive deception campaign to clear the airspace. Intelligence operatives deliberately fed false information into monitored communication channels, seeding rumors that U.S. forces had already secured the airman and were moving him in an overland ground convoy toward the coast. Iranian commanders reacted to the fake intelligence. They diverted their IRGC search parties away from the Zagros Mountains and directed them toward major transit corridors to hunt a phantom convoy. By hacking the enemy's decision-making cycle, the intelligence community actively thinned out the defensive lines. They created the physical space the military needed to deploy the extraction force. On Saturday, following signal verification, President Donald Trump authorized a Joint Special Operations Task Force to execute the final 7-hour rescue mission. Ground extraction fell to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. They flew MH-6 Littlebirds and Blackhawks low and slow through the jagged mountain passes under the cover of night vision. A continuous extraction window far exceeded the fuel capacity of the helicopters. To solve this, U.S. forces built a temporary forward arming and refueling point, or FARP, directly inside Iranian territory, allowing the fleet to rearm without leaving the airspace. The U.S. military didn't sneak in. They erected a synchronized 3-kilometer protective bubble around the mountain crevice. Inside that radius, persistent airborne surveillance locked onto the terrain, ready to engage any IRGC units that attempted to close in. MQ-9 Reaper drones patrolled this inner perimeter, maintaining a lethal overwatch directly above the ground operators. On the outer perimeter, heavy B-1B Lancer bombers executed localized suppression strikes, dropping high explosives to prevent Iranian reinforcements from mobilizing toward the extraction zone. They built a temporary, heavily fortified dome of air dominance deep inside sovereign enemy territory, holding the line just long enough to hoist the colonel out. Operating in such extreme conditions pushed the U.S. military's hardware to its physical limits, resulting in severe material attrition at the FARP site. 2 MC-130J Commando II transport aircraft, massive logistical assets, suffered mechanical and environmental failures, becoming irreparably stuck on the makeshift mountain runway. With the extraction window closing, the commandos followed strict special operations doctrine. They scuttled both MC-130Js and an immobilized MH-6 helicopter, burning them to the ground to ensure no sensitive avionics fell into Iranian hands. This ledger shows the final material cost of the April operation. Between the initial downed F-15E, the heavily damaged A-10, and the scuttled Special Operations Fleet, the U.S. lost hundreds of millions of dollars in aviation technology. The destruction of these advanced platforms is a calculated feature of military operations. The massive hardware loss is willingly absorbed to protect classified technology and ensure a single service member returns home. Despite the volume of destroyed aircraft and the intense resistance on the ground, the Sunday raid successfully extracted the colonel with 0 U.S. casualties. Securing the airman eliminated Iran's opportunity to parade a prisoner of war on global television, denying Tehran the leverage it needed to halt the U.S. offensive. Immediately following the successful extraction, the administration escalated the conflict. With no hostages to consider, the U.S. issued new ultimatums, expanding strikes into Iran's civilian power and transportation sectors, leveraging their new freedom of action to force the Strait of Hormuz open. The extraction from the Zagros Mountains proved that combining encrypted satellite tracking, tactical deception, and an overwhelming aerial bubble could retrieve an airman from the heart of a regional power. By neutralizing Tehran's primary bargaining chip, the military ensured that the risks of the air war did not result in a hostage crisis, allowing Operation Epic Fury to proceed on U.S. terms.